I'll tell you what,
I think they could do this thing as a ski swing here.
Yes, good.
I came prepared with everything.
that's like you had in a cigarette.
What's that? Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Looks like our old riot shield. Right.
If I remember right, it was
It depends on how much work you put into it.
If I remember right, is our
Put stuff on there.
Yeah. Well, there has,
But see, I can take on the corner right now. But see, I can take pictures inside that from the film too.
a windshield.
See,
Well, you're better than I am, so you might have to do that.
let's see.
I'll mainly take one this way to get the audience.
Yeah.
All right, everybody, we're going to go ahead and get started. Since we are a Catholic organization, we will open up with a prayer. In the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, deliver us from evil. Amen. All right, good evening, everybody. Thank you for coming. And we're going to go ahead and get started here. I want to tell you before we go on a little bit about our presenter here, Nancy Aguirre. She graduated from Apple University in 1999 with a Bachelor of Science degree in accounting. She worked as an accounting assistant for 8 years with the Kansas City Police Department before moving to the Kansas City Health Department. Since 2006, Nancy has worked in the fiscal, administration, and community and family health education divisions, earning her certificate in grants management for pass-through entities, completed multiple other certificates in trainer and quality improvement programs, worked as an assistant to the deputy director, led the implemented multiple training programs for employees for Microsoft Excel training course, was even requested by the Missouri Public Health Association for their annual conference in 2017 as a special breakout session. Nancy has completed a COVID-19 contact tracing course provided by Johns Hopkins University to get her up to speed with the current pandemic and has been answering calls and complaints regarding COVID-19 for the past 5 years.
Months.
Months, I'm sorry,
Yeah.
months. Seems like 5 years.
Yes.
All right, with that being said, we will let Nancy take over and go with her.
Watch for it. Yes. 5 months, not 5 years. Thank you very much. So, thank you everybody for coming and for being online. I went with the shield to make it a little easier for you to hear me. If you have trouble, we'll switch back and forth. We're going to try to switch over to the presentation.
Good.
All right. Give us 1 second. You got it?
You got it.
All right. get to the end, I will go through to make sure that we did answer everybody's questions. Try to get some from the room, go back and go over the ones in the comment section. So feel free to type your questions, but I'm not going to ignore them, but just won't get to answer them until we get to the end. So, but as I said, I'll try to get everybody's answers. So, there's a lot of information going out about COVID-19, and we're trying to sort out what's the truth versus what's the myth, and what we need to know that's the new normal, the new reality that we're facing right now. So that's what this presentation is going to be about. Hopefully, I'll be able to answer your questions and give you the correct information, and maybe get you some information you didn't know or hadn't heard anything about. So we're going to start from the very beginning. First, I want to lighten off the mood just a little bit. Here's some very important public health information. Does everyone know what the difference between the swine flu and the bird flu is? One needs a treatment and the other requires an ointment. But I'm fine. I know it's terrible, but it's public health. Public health, that's all I care about. Okay, so that lightens the mood just a little bit. Let's get started. So, COVID-19. Why is it called COVID-19? It's from the corona, C-O, virus, V-I, disease, D, and it started in 2019. COVID-19. That's where the name comes from. Corona refers to the crown-shaped spikes that appear on the molecule of the virus. Coronavirus is the virus that causes COVID-19. So you can sort of use them interchangeably to some degree. And it's a respiratory illness that spreads from person to person. CDC does not have documented confirmation of surface-to-person transfers or transmission of the disease. It's also known as severe acute respiratory syndrome coronavirus 2, also known as SARS-CoV-2. So that's another name that it does go by. So if you ever see that name, that's another name that it does go by. So you may have heard of SARS before. So it's along that same family. What are the symptoms? Symptoms of COVID-19. The incubation period, or the time period that symptoms may appear, is 2 to 14 days after exposure to the virus, or someone who is in their infectious period. People with those symptoms may have COVID, with these symptoms may have COVID-19. Fever or chills, a cough, shortness of breath and difficulty breathing, fatigue, muscle or body aches, headache, new loss of taste or smell, which is the big one most people get, and that comes on very quickly. Nausea or vomiting, this is one of the less often symptoms, but it does occur in some cases. Diarrhea, again, less often, but does occur, and as we all are finding out, asymptomatic. In a lot of cases, we don't find out about the asymptomatic unless it happens during a screening. For instance, a lot of procedures going into hospitals, even sometimes cases of dental procedures like getting teeth pulled, or even minor outpatient procedures you're getting screened right now. That's when we find out about a lot of cases of asymptomatic. If you have any of these symptoms, stay home. Okay? Make that nice and big. Stay home. If you start with any of these symptoms until we can be identified as to why you have these symptoms, stay home. And the little gentleman on the screen there, that's Cody. I don't know if everybody can see it on my screen. I'd like to introduce, this is Cody, my buddy. COVID-19. This is, so, I keep him on my desk. This is from a company called Giant Microbes. And it comes with a little card with background information. caught corona. So, I just gave him COVID. You toss him around. Would anyone like to catch COVID? You come up and get COVID later. You see it right there. You're just saying, you wanted COVID earlier, so.
I just wanted to get quarantined.
You just want to get quarantined, so. But there are some cases where it can be explained by other, the symptoms can be explained by other reasons, medications, allergies, but unless you're sure, it's safer to stay home. Until we know for sure, rather than exposing other people at doctor's offices, at work, at schools, at daycares. Big questions for the next section is, how do I avoid COVID-19? So the transmission of COVID-19, and this is what I ended up talking to people, what we're supposed to start out with is 2 days a week, 8 hours a day, which has grown into about 25 to 35 hours a week of answering calls and walking people through whether or not they have been exposed to COVID-19. So the virus is thought to be carried by the droplets produced when sick people cough. Sneeze, same way it occurs with influenza or other respiratory pathogens. Even just talking, we produce air coming out, and on that air is moisture droplets. If we're ill, on those moisture droplets are pathogens that include that virus. In order to be exposed, you have to have been within 6 feet for at least 15 minutes or more consecutively. Now there are exceptions to that. So if you are in an office, I have an office that's maybe 10 by 7 feet. If I had a slightly larger office and there was someone in there sharing that office space with me, and there had been a way that they configured it that we sat 7 feet apart, that'd be safe, right? We're 7 feet apart. No, because we're in there at least, if I was in there with that person, at least 6+ hours a day working, we are continuously putting virus. If one of us is sick, we're continuously putting out air, one of us that has virus, continuously throughout the day into the small space. That would be an exception to the rule. Because the other person is breathing that air that has virus on it. Not the surface, the air. Same thing as in a restaurant. Servers, you can pass by somebody who's been ill, not get it. But if you're two cooks in a small kitchen, even if you stand 6 feet apart and have your own workspaces, but you're in there for an 8-hour shift, constantly within 6 to 7 feet of each other for 8 hours, 9 hours, cooking together, there's a good chance that you've exchanged the air that has the virus on it. We would tell that restaurant they need to take both cooks out. One is down for being ill, one is down for quarantine. So 6 to 8 feet apart is good, but that aggregate of 4 to 8 hours is where that illness is going to come in. So those are some exceptions to that exposure rule. And it has to be starting 48 hours prior to the onset of symptoms. So just like with the flu or when you have a fever, you can be infectious up to 48 hours prior to you start feeling the symptoms. So whenever someone tests positive for COVID or they start feeling their symptoms, we go back 48 hours. That's when we start figuring out who they might have infected. Now, even more important, how do you avoid it? How do we avoid getting COVID? Avoid touching your face if you touch a lot of stuff. Wash your hands with soap and water regularly, or sanitizer that is greater than or equal to 60% alcohol. So if you're using hand sanitizers like this is one I carry in my purse all the time, 67% alcohol. So I always check. All of mine at work, all mine in my purse, all ones I have at home are at least 65 or better alcohol percentage. High touch areas, handrails, door handles, door knobs, shop nose, your mouth. You take off the mask, you take it from earpieces down. Then you use hand sanitizer, wash your hands. When you're out in public and using handrails, or on stairs, door handles, doorknobs, always use hand sanitizer, wash your hands before you touch your face, before you touch your food. Those kinds of things to make sure that your hands are clean before you touch anything. Wear a mask. Masks do not eliminate the risk of the chance of you getting COVID. It reduces the risk. Just like standing 6 feet apart or sitting 6 feet apart reduces the risk. Doesn't eliminate, it just reduces. So physical distancing. I talked about, just like the kids, we talked about red rover, we don't cross over. So that 6 feet, we don't need to cross over. Again, for as many you can, but that 15 minutes is important. They determine that's the kind of exposure limit for someone being around someone who has COVID. Avoid large crowds. The larger the crowd, the more risk of exposure. The image I like to give people is when we're little kids and you go outside and it starts getting chilly and we get to see our breath and we think that's so cool, so we stand up there huffing, try to get the big cloud. The longer you stand talking to somebody, that little cloud of moisture starts to appear. We can't see it, but it's starting to grow. When you're just standing talking to someone for a minute, you get a little puff there, you get a little bit of moisture in the air between the two. And then you walk away, it dissipates. You stand there talking to someone for 10 minutes, you each get a little bit bigger cloud of moisture you can't see. If you stand there talking for 15 minutes, that's when you start getting a large cloud of moisture between the two of you that starts mixing. That's when that risk of you breathing in the other person's moisture and they're breathing in yours, that's where that transmission occurs. So if you start exceeding that, that's when the cloud keeps getting bigger and bigger. That's the image in my head of how that transmission is occurring. The more moisture you're producing, the more moisture they're producing, the more risk of that transmission you get. That's what you want to avoid. So the bigger the crowd, the more people producing all that air, the more virus could be out there. Stay at home if you're sick. Even if you don't have COVID, think about your immune system. If your immune system is not 100% because you're ill from anything else, a cold, a virus of any kind, you can be more susceptible to getting anything else that's out there. So give your immune system a fighting chance and stay home if you're sick. And protect yourself until you're better. And then you can go back out. This is a chart, and I've given Steve and Bruce a document version of this presentation that they can mail out for everybody who wants it. And this is a document that came from the New York Times. It explains the coronavirus activities based on risk. So you can start at low risk and it moves up to high risk activities. And the risk factors that they take into consideration start with, or based on how many people, the space that's available, how long the exposure is, whether it's inside or outside, are there high-touch surfaces, and what kind of cases are there? Is it in a high number case area or a low number? And how likely is the compliance to COVID restrictions and rules and regulations and safety? If you look to the far left, you'll see that takeout food, low risk, outdoor exercise, tennis, things that go on outdoors, you're in the low risk categories. You get up to the higher low risk areas, grocery shopping, library, museum. Those are kind of still in the low risk. You get up all the way to the high risk categories, nightclub. probably big partiers in here, hanging out at the nightclub every night. I know you're gonna have to curtail it just a little bit here. Unfortunately, church is in the high risk category. That's one of our social support groups. That's where our friends are. That's where, unfortunately, we do see a high spike in church and faith-based organizations because that's where we're comfortable. That's where we let our guard down. And that's where we see some spikes going on. Because that's where we get the hugs. That's where we get close to people. That's where we forget to put our masks on. So we just have to be more careful. So just be careful. And again, this is just, you take into consideration the people, the space, surfaces. So now we're going to talk about masks. This is a favorite topic of a lot of people that I work with because we see so many. We also have a lot of people that have actually told our enforcement group, I'm not going to wear a mask and you can't make me. Oh, yes, we can. It's called pulling your certificate of occupancy. So, but we see a lot of people who do not wear their mask correctly. So, I'm going to actually show you a few slides. So you can see how to wear it. But just to show you some examples, people are taking masks seriously. No face masks, no tacos. That's serious stuff, people. If you come in the store without a mask, we'll have to take your temperature. Yes, we only heard that from our Some people are getting very serious about this. We applaud their creativity. Or at least I do. So, do not wear the mask below your nose. I've heard some people say, well, that's what the hair of your nose is for. Virus still goes in your nose. Don't leave your chin exposed. There's a bit that makes a gap, and the gap provides a space for the air to get in. If air is getting in, the virus is getting in. Don't wear your mask loosely with the gap on the sides. Oops. Go back here. Give it just a second, sorry, I didn't give it enough timing on here. So, and a lot of these slides that you're going to see, the reason that they did this is it's providing gaps. Anytime you have a gap in your mask, so as you can see there's a gap on the side, there's a gap underneath. If there's a big gap, air can get in, virus is getting in. You can see on this slide, there's big gaps on the sides. If it's too loose, you're getting a lot of air in, virus is getting in. If you wear your mask just what covers the tip of your nose, you're going to find that there's a big gap next to your nose. Again, you're getting a lot of air in that way. Neither the ill-fitting mask. My favorite, pushing your mask all the way under your chin. You're stretching out those straps. Number one, you might as well not be wearing a mask, and number two, when you do put it back on, it's stretched out completely and probably not going to be a good fitting mask after that. The winner, do wear your mask so that it comes all the way up close to the bridge of your nose, so that it's at least touching the sides of your face, that it comes down to the bottom of your chin, and if you can, you want to tighten the loops behind your ears so that it's full, and you don't want to have too much of a gap along the sides. You want it snug so that you don't have gaps. Now you don't want it so tight that you cannot move your mouth and you cannot breathe. In that case, you just need to find a better fitting mask. But there are a lot of options for masks. I made my own masks. There's lots of patterns available. I've used shoestrings for the straps. So you can, if your ears are sensitive to the backs of your ears, you can use all sorts of material. You don't need the elastic, you can just use shoestrings. There's, of course, as everybody knows, there's the blue ones that you can buy off Amazon. You can buy lots of those that are disposable. If you have trouble with the way your mask fits, you can buy these things. They're little cages. without the mask first. It's over your nose, over your mouth. When you put your mask on now, as you can see, there's a lot more room for my mouth. So now when I put it on under my mask, I have a lot more room to talk and to breathe. My mask still fits tight, but I have a lot more room to move my mouth. I don't feel like the mask is stretched straight across. So there's a lot of options available if you're having trouble breathing, if you're having trouble with your mask. There's things that are available that you can get to adjust. So you're not stuck with just an ill-fitting mask. So there's things we can do. Now we got CDC guidelines. What do we need to know? Now, Kansas City Health Department, what we educate everybody on is what the CDC says, CDC guidelines. That's what we use. So great place to get information if you want to read it on your own. And again, this presentation will be available. You can go online to Centers for Disease Control, cdc.gov, and they have a coronavirus section. And they keep it updated. So every time they provide new information, it goes online. Another great place that's available is the Missouri Department of Health and Senior Services. They have a COVID-19 dashboard. If you're curious what the numbers look like, if you're a number person, they have a dashboard that provides numbers by county for the state of Missouri. And Kansas City is separated out. Kansas City, Missouri also has our own. You can go to the kcmo.gov website. And we have it just for Kansas City also. Our numbers are a little different than what the state does because the state throws a bunch of cases our way that actually ignores. We have to fix them. They try, they just don't always have that. Kind of like, second cousin once removed or something. But we fix it, and we correct the numbers, and we put them out on the website, so our numbers may look a little different than what the state's numbers do. So there's several different websites that you can go to for the numbers. But they're all great resources for getting information. And again, we talked about exposure before, but the CDC goes into a little more detail. So something else I wanted to talk about regarding exposure is something I've had to do a lot of talking about with some of our calls lately. It's called a household exposure. And that's a term that's got me hung up on a couple times because people aren't very happy with me. Let's say my dad's here. Let's say he decides to go out clubbing tonight. And he ends up testing positive for COVID. Well, my parents live in the same house. So what most people think, well, my mom has to quarantine for 14 days because she lives in the same house as him. Well, under household exposure rules, mom, because she lives in the same house as him, yes, she has to quarantine for 14 days. After his 10 days are over with, because they live in the same house. So she's actually quarantined for 24 days because he went out and partied. Because it's 14 days from the last date of exposure. Well, if they're living in the same house, the last date of exposure is the last date he's sick. So thanks to Dad, she gets to stay home for 24 days. Well, he's happy about that. He wants her to stay home for 24 days. But because he actually got it, he gets done in 10 days and he can go out and party again. Sounds to me like Mom won't be mad at him. She's in for 24, he's in and out after 10. But that's what the whole household exposure is. So one person gets sick, no one else gets sick, everyone in the rest of the family's in for 24 days. Unless there's actually a way to isolate the one person completely away from the rest of the family. Like a mother-in-law suite or something like that. when somebody gets out of quarantine, what do we have to do to get someone out? That's all available. We got to find out what a close contact is. That's where we get the information that we share with people. How do I define who's actually going to get quarantined? It's on that website. Because a lot of times, if you find out you're COVID positive and you want to warn people that you've been around, you're the best person to warn them first, because it's going to take us 2 or 3 days to get notified by the state. This is out there. Who's a close contact to me? Any individual who's within 6 feet of me for at least 15 minutes starting the day before I started feeling ill. So if you went over to a friend's house for a barbecue, who I sat at that table, we ate hamburgers and hot dogs, I should warn them that they might want to quarantine until they talk to somebody. Then that one. And then a term that you heard earlier is I took a class in contact tracing. We have about 30 staff members currently at the health department that we're doing what we call contact tracing. That's their whole job. We find out someone has, through the state, we find out that somebody in our jurisdiction is positive. Their job, once it's been assigned to them, is to call them and say, okay, when did you start feeling ill? All right, what did you do? We find out, okay, go back 48 hours. What did you do on this day? Did you stay home all day or did you go out? Where did you go? Who were you around? You went to work? What did you do for work? What did you do that day? You go into the office? What is your office setup like? And we ask them questions and we start walking through your day until we find out who all they were possibly exposed. Get the phone numbers, the names, we identify who was a close contact so we can contact that person and get them quarantined. And then we follow up with those people. Get them quarantined. Make sure they don't test positive. If they do test positive, then we try to make sure that they don't have any contacts either. The idea being, once someone tests positive, if we can identify anyone that in that first layer of people that they exposed and get them to stay home, so that if any of them should test positive, they don't expose anybody, that first ring of people, that exposure goes nowhere else. That's our goal. Then that exposure goes nowhere else, and that's our goal. Doesn't always happen that way if you get asymptomatic people. But our goal would be to kill that particular spread rate, and that's what contact tracing is hopefully doing. So you've heard me use a couple of words: quarantine and isolation. And I don't use those terms interchangeably. They do mean two different things. And I'll tell you what. Isolation is used when someone is confirmed or symptomatic, and it's an individual, or it's an individual waiting on test results. So you either have been confirmed to have had COVID, or you're waiting on test results, because we think you might have COVID. Quarantine, you've been exposed to somebody who has COVID-19, or potentially has COVID-19. So that's the difference there. One is you have it, or the other is you've been exposed to someone who has it. Isolation. The release requirements for someone who's in isolation is 10 days from the onset of symptoms or the date of test if you're asymptomatic. You have to be 24 hours without fever and fever-reducing medication, and all other symptoms have to have improved. And we say all other symptoms have to have improved because let's say you have asthma or COPD, your cough may linger for a while. So we don't say clear. Quarantine. The release requirements, 14 days from the date of last exposure to the person who tested positive. So that goes back to the household exposure. 14 days starts once the positive member of the household completes their isolation. So that could be up to 24 days. The reason that it's different, the isolation is only 10 days because we're trying to ensure that the infectious person that infectious period is completely over for the ill person. It's like a countdown. We know you have it. So now we're just counting down to get you through your infection period. There is an end point for the average person who has COVID to the infectious period. For a person who's been exposed, we don't know if you're going to get it. You could get it anytime from 2 to 14 days from the time you were exposed. So we have to wait and see. You could test any time during those 14 days, but if you've got a good immune system, we actually have people that don't test positive until day 12 or 13. So you can get tested on day 2, day 4, day 7, day 10, and test negative on all those. And it's not going to change the fact you're going to have to quarantine for 14 days. So that's the difference between isolation and quarantine. So now I'm going to talk about some myths and some facts. So someone in my office building of 350 people tested positive for COVID and they're not closing it down and sending us all home. This is wrong. They're risking my life. It's a myth. So a place of business does not necessarily have to shut down just because one member of the staff tested positive for COVID. They could have brought it in, most likely brought it in from outside if it's only one person. And in order to have exposed anyone else, they have to be within 6 feet of that person for 15 minutes or more during the 48 hours prior, starting 48 hours prior to the onset of symptoms. And in some cases, we find out that a person tested positive after they've already not only been ill, their infectious period is over, and they've already recovered and returned to work because it was already handled when we're dealing with the rumor mill after the fact, which has happened in some of my phone calls. I've actually gotten phone calls that way. But I have to spend 45 minutes talking to someone now that you aren't going to get COVID, no, you're not going to die within the next 10 minutes, but okay. I heard from other staff that two other staff members tested positive for COVID. Management is doing nothing. They aren't telling us anything. They aren't doing anything. I have a right to know. Places of business don't have to shut down because someone tested positive. And there is this thing called HIPAA, where no identifiable information can be shared. Just to give an example, I have people, some businesses are requiring that our health department give them a letter saying, yes, they can return to work. Even though the CDC clearly says on their website, if you've done 10 days and they produced a letter saying I tested positive on this date and I did my 10 days, they still want a letter. But according to HIPAA, I can't say the word isolation, quarantine, COVID. But they want a letter from us. So we have a carefully worded letter that says they are able to return to work. And that's all it says from the health department. But, so a business is even more hand-tied than we are, because they also can't say those things. They also can't say employees. They can't give identifiable information such as someone who works in a section. So most businesses are dealing with, we tell businesses you have to deal with this on a one individual basis. If the person was actually exposed, then you do. So we tell individuals that call and complain. Management is not hiding this. They're dealing with it on an individual basis. Another issue we get to deal with, my apartment building management sent out letters saying someone in our building has positive, but they won't say who. I have a right to know so we can avoid them for our safety. It's another case of, no, you don't have a right to know. And you try to explain to people this is no different, COVID is no different than AIDS, or any other health issue. You don't have a right to know. This is covered by HIPAA. Arriving in an elevator or passing in a common area through a door, unless you're somebody who just gets a kick out of riding an elevator for 15, 20, 30 minutes a day. I mean, everybody has a hobby. It's possible, you're bored, and you want to set a chair up in an elevator, I guess. To each their own. But it's a medical issue, it's covered by HIPAA. And in this day and age with social media the way it is, attorney family manager provide that way. They don't have the right to post anything. As a matter of fact, we tell building management it's not even to do that. If they're telling management, because they're probably asking for arrangements to have somebody bring them their mail. If it's a locked mailbox service in the building. So we actually tell them don't do it. If I've been exposed to COVID, my work will have to send me home no matter what, right? Again, unfortunately, this is not always true either. There is an exception to this rule. It's something called critical infrastructure. And I've had a few people try to get themselves covered under critical infrastructure that are not. Critical infrastructure is hospitals, some financial institutions, emergency personnel, obviously first responders, kind of common sense to me. Water services is another example. What is it now, Evergy instead of KCP&L? There's a minimum of staff that have to keep those infrastructures working for us to function as a city. That's critical infrastructure. So the rule for critical infrastructure is if I worked for KCP&L or Evergy, and in order to keep the electricity up and running, they have to keep a power plant going. They need X number of minimum number of employees per shift to keep it operating so that the entire city has electricity. And they had an exposure at work that sent so many people home to quarantine that they would have to shut down the power plants. They have the right to call people back to work who have been quarantined as long as they show no symptoms. But it's only if they have no symptoms. If they have symptoms, they're sent back home and they have to make other contingency plan. I ain't calling people from out of town. But that's the only exception. That's the critical infrastructure exception. Now, some people are thinking that grocery stores, restaurants fall under critical infrastructure. Those are essential businesses. Those can run like when you have a shutdown. But those are essential businesses. I have to keep reminding people those aren't critical infrastructure. Sorry. And here's just I put a few other the myth versus the facts in here that can kind of be read over on your own. A lot of times when we hear about cases in businesses, we're hearing about them after the fact. Sometimes the news does get hold of it if the health department is going out right now because it's happening. But when staff hears about it or people hear about it through the rumor mill, it's because it's after the fact. So we get a lot of panic calls that way. But a lot of times it's after the fact. So it's old news and people are panicking about it. We get a lot of calls. But I tell people, call, ask questions, we'll check it out. But our staff at the health department, our enforcement group, they actually have full staff that go out between 10 p.m. and 2 a.m. to check certain businesses to make sure they're abiding by the city's emergency orders that are in place. So we've got people that are going around the clock doing enforcement right now. Just some final do's and don'ts. Do shut off the news once in a while. Take a walk outside. Just stay physically distance and have a mask. Do stay in contact with friends and family for their well-being as well as your own. I don't like the term social distancing, I prefer physical distancing. We need social support, especially right now. Don't let social media and the news put you in a state of panic or depression. Lay off the Snapchat. Do ask for help when you need it. Right now, we all need a little help. This is kind of nuts right now. We're learning a new normal, and this is sometimes we all need a little help. It's not, there's nothing wrong with asking for a little help. Whether it's picking up the phone and calling just because you need to talk to someone, because you've been hanging out by yourself too much, or hanging out with one particular person you might happen to live with for a little bit too long. Talk to someone else. Don't only talk about what's wrong in the world or society right now. We need to talk about something that's good once in a while too. So pick a night and talk about the good stuff once in a while. Do ask questions. That's what the health department's around. If you're not sure, the news is not giving the full picture all the time about what's going on. So don't rely on them all the time. If something doesn't sound right and you want to know the full answer, you can't find it on the CDC website, call the health department if you have a question. Sometimes the calls, there's about 4 of us that take calls in rotating turns. If you get a voicemail, leave a message, we will call you back. And I do have cards here available if anyone wants to call or send an email to me. Specifically, I will get back to you. And don't forget, it's covered up. I can't see what my last question is. Don't forget to share the information that you talked about tonight with other people. So I also have some helpful websites that have the CDC information. Domestic travel is also an important one. If you're going some places, this website that I found has every state, and if there's information, if they have restrictions on if you travel there or not. I've been using this one since I started doing it, and it's updated every few days. Don't go to Alaska, they ask a lot of you to show up. Like having a COVID test in the last 3 days of your arrival. Alaska for us. We have the health department information on here where you can get our up-to-date information on there too. Again, this is going to be available, emailed out, so if you want to meet this kind of stuff up, you can take a picture with your phone or just get an email. These are the local health departments, depending on where you live. Kansas City, Clay County, Jackson County, Platte County. Depending on the jurisdiction you or your family and friends may live in, call, ask questions. These are for the enforcements if you need out somewhere. Call, report issues that you see. And again, like the emergency order that's in Kansas City does not necessarily apply to all the other jurisdictions. If you spend a lot of time in another jurisdiction, you can go to their websites, they'll have their requirements for those areas. And it's always good to check those too. So now I'm going to open it up. First of all, I want to thank you. Oh, were you looking for phone numbers up there? Okay, put it back up for a second. And if you live in Kansas City, one of the numbers that's up there is 311 Action Center. You can schedule tests, drive-through tests. Kansas City residents can drive through tests. You just call 311 Action Center and they will schedule a test and just drive through. They're all over the city. So first of all, I want to thank you for paying attention. I know this is all thrilling information. And if you want to contact COVID, you can. He's very friendly. He hasn't bitten anybody yet. So, and now any questions, if anybody has them. So let me go back to my screen here real quick so make sure I get everybody in. Question, first one.
About 4 days ago, I think, CDC came out with the results of a study that said 70% of people who wore masks still got COVID-19 because they wore it most of the time confusion and not one succinct direction. It's like somebody shot it and everything kind of hits the wall. Any comments on the CDC? If they seem to change with the wind.
So your question is about the study that the CDC put out about people that wearing masks still get COVID.
Yeah.
Okay. The only thing I can really comment on that is that, as I mentioned earlier, wearing a mask, unless you're talking about like the N95 type mask, and when I say the N95, it's wearing an N95 and being fit tested. Masks only reduce the risk of getting COVID. It does not eliminate.
I'm wearing the mask to help you.
Yes. So it's kind of like wearing, I equate it to my car. In my car, I have a seatbelt, I have a front airbag, I have a side airbag. I can have all of those and I can still die in a car accident tonight.
Yep.
So I can wear a shield, I can wear my mask, I can still get COVID before I go home tonight. So it does all of those things, just like all my safety precautions. I can have every safety piece in my car that was available to buy in my 2020 vehicle, and I can still, depending on the situation, I can still end up in a car accident tonight that can kill me. Same thing when you can wear every available precaution, and I can be wearing my mask with my guard in it that makes sure that my mask is fitting me properly, because I know how to wear it, and I can keep my 6-foot distance that I know is correct. And if I goof just one time, I can still catch COVID. So there is, unless you want to live in a bubble, there is no 100% protection. All they're doing is you're layering methods to reduce your risk. So,
I agree 100%, but it's confusing people.
it gets,
This is the right thing.
the right thing is continue to layer your options. It's keeping the 6 feet, but again, the 6 feet even is only for 2 people that are having a normal conversation in an average voice. That's why we discussed, we have people that are talking about limiting sports, because you go to a sporting event and you start to, you're not speaking in a normal tone. You tend to speak with more vehemence, more power behind it. So that 6 foot now is out the window. We would have to space everybody about 20 to 30 feet apart to have it be correct in spacing. So it's confusing, but again, if you understand that all these things you're doing are just layering your protection risk to reduce it, that's all they're doing. But they're trying to provide you with as much information as they can, so for us to make our educated decisions. So
the mask keeps you from spreading that, as opposed for you receiving it.
correct. It's the masks are protecting you, so if you're sick, it's keeping you from putting out as much into the air. I don't like the shield. So, and if you're wearing like a shield, this is an option for if somebody has trouble like asthma, or in this case, I opted to wear the shield so people could see my face a little better and the sound would travel better. But it's a case of, this is not protecting everything. If anybody was too close, was within 6 feet of me, this would not be as protective for anyone else, because there is still, if I was COVID positive, air is still getting out and around, a little too easy. These were more meant to be as a double for medical personnel to wear their masks and the shield, so it protected their eyes. But they've been allowed as an option for people that have trouble with masks. As long as they reach past the side of their face and below their chin. it's allowed as an option. There's some cases where it doesn't really do any protection, but I forgot, and I haven't dealt with Cass County. I can get you Cass County.
Yeah. Ron,
The ones I put up there are the ones I've dealt with the most in 5 months. We have a partnership that we've dealt with where we can just call the other health departments and transfer cases if we get one or the other, or if I get a phone call from, a lot of people don't realize that the Kansas City Health Department only deals with cases that are within Kansas City. And so we'll get complaints, and so those are the ones that I've dealt with the most that are just right around us, so. But I will get you. Let me see, do we have any questions on? Do we have any on here yet?
Nope.
Okay.
All right, you're talking about the 24 and the 10, 12 days, or 14 days, and 10 days. That's not always accurate. I've been there.
No, it's not always accurate, no.
I've been there.
Yes.
I'm 6 weeks out
Yes.
from my diagnosis. I still was positive.
Yes.
They said continue to isolate.
Yes.
So, and I know a lot of people.
Yes.
The guy that got it the same day I did, he was 5 weeks, it was 7 weeks before I turned. His wife was asymptomatic. It was 8 weeks before she tested it.
Yes.
So that 10 days and you say go back, to me, they should be testing before they're clear.
Testing, now, being positive and being infectious can be two different things, though, is what they're working
But
with.
they're also saying isolate. If I'm positive, isolate.
Because what they're working with, according to the CDC guidelines, now there is a small percentage of the population who can test positive for up to 90 days after they're no longer infectious. That doesn't mean they're infectious, that just means that they will continue to
But they
test
also-
positive because of the antibodies in their system.
Continue.
They're no longer, they don't require quarantine, they don't require quarantine or isolation for that. As a matter of fact, I actually just recently learned this in the last 2 to 3 weeks. Because the antibodies in the system, which can cause people to test positive, we have cases where if you tested positive in the last 90 days and you were exposed to somebody else, you are actually not required to quarantine again because you still have the antibody in your system.
My doctor told me he didn't test me for the antibodies because he said they're not.
I'm not a medical
In the other
person.
statement, he said, there's no guarantee that you're not gonna get it. There was somebody.
No, there's no guarantee you're not gonna get it again, I
They
agree.
just got it, they had it 3-4 weeks ago and they just got it.
There's no guarantee you won't get it again, I agree with that.
So we need to be pushing the mask, the social distancing,
Yes.
all of that, and let's get serious.
Oh, agreed.
We've got a governor that says the state is different. I could be in Kansas City, or Jackson County, and 5 minutes later, I'm in Cass County, where they don't have restrictions. Or I could be in Benton County, it's the same thing. And then we're hearing, well, they don't have much in Cape Girardeau. Cape Girardeau is a good with COVID right now.
We have people that, we have people that end up, and I tell people all the time, everybody's different, that's why its symptoms have to improve. I spoke to someone the other day that was still running a fever after 10 days. I said, then you have to continue to isolate and you need to check your doctor. Someone else whose symptoms hadn't improved after 10 days, I said, I also recommended they can continue their isolation and contact their doctor. I had someone else who I recommended in the last month, they actually go to the emergency room because of their symptoms and they've been past their 10, they were almost their 10 days were up. Every person's situation is different. This is the average that the CDC is
The other
referring to.
thing is, you're never over. I'm 7 months out and there's still problems going on.
And they have, there's information on the CDC, there's information on the CDC, yes.
It continues.
There could be long-term, there's new studies that say there could be long-term,
There is,
so.
there is in most cases.
So, but if there's a lot of, because this is so new, they're still finding out what's going to happen with this. But we are pulling certificates of occupancy because people won't wear masks. That's why we have enforcement officers that go out between 10 p.m. and 2 a.m. to do enforcement. We are closing, we have whole groups that get, fines and
And
stuff.
I think Kansas City and Jackson County is doing a good job. It seems to be Clay County and Johnson County, Wyandotte County. But the
Unfortunately,
rest of the state, both sides of the state line are not doing their job.
there's nothing I can do on this
I
one.
know that, but that needs to be pointed out more and more.
We do. So, let's move on to some of the other questions and we can finish that discussion. We go to Bruce, I'll get you next.
On the comment about so many people wearing masks and still getting the virus, that's kind of a negative sign of looking at it. There could be hundreds and thousands of people that don't get it because of the mask.
Yes.
There's no way of tracking those masks.
No, and that's very true. And we have, and a lot of precautions that get taken, and a lot of this, we're still on a learning curve. There's a lot of people, like I said, because we have some people that aren't wearing things correctly. They're not wearing the mask correctly. They don't understand the 6 foot. I still get calls from people that I've been talking to for weeks. Oh, I didn't know that. Oh, really? Oh, we've been doing that wrong. We've been having them come back too soon. So I sit there and I still am walking different organizations through every single time they get a positive. They call, I have been in some call takers don't give out their direct line. I'm willing to give my direct line out every time I get a call. That's probably why I'm doing 30 hours instead of 16 a week. And I'm starting to recognize phone numbers when they call in. But we're walking it through, and sometimes they've gotten to the point where they know, I think I know what you're going to tell me, but let me just go over this with you one more time. And we do. It's, sometimes we close down a whole daycare room just out of precaution, especially when it's kiddos. We don't take a lot of risks with kiddos. We just say close down. It's not worth it. Send them home for me. But, a lot of them are working through school kids, especially with kids coming back into school. We're seeing a lot of issues, but it's a learning curve to get them up to where they need to be. And a lot of times, once we have that first scare, then all of a sudden we're where we need to be. Unfortunately, it takes the one to do it. And then they start realizing, oh, we're not where we need to be. So, but yeah, there's a lot they're doing. And I get calls from citizens that are worried, and then after I talk to the locations, I find, okay, can you walk me through your process? I don't tell them, how do you handle this? What do you do in this situation? I said, walk me through your process. And they start telling me, well, here's what we do in this, when we do this, and I just start checking my boxes up, going, oh, okay. And they sometimes they not only meet what I'm asking, what I would expect them to do, they're exceeding. And I'm going, oh, I like that even more. Okay. So, and then they tell me what they've already done in case the positive they had. And I'm going, excellent. Next.
I have a question about how the numbers are reported. Since we live on a state line, if a person in Missouri goes over to a Kansas facility and is tested, does that report come back to their home address? Is that where that case is reported as being positive?
It is reported based on your residence. So if they get tested in Kansas, then it's transferred over to the Kansas City, Missouri Health Department.
That is one of how those numbers come out because you do that crossing back and forth all the time.
Yep. Over here and then over here.
So if the mills did not go, the school did not open at all,
Okay.
for the school business. So what happens then, well, I guess August of next year, if we're still having all these high numbers, can the school district still have to stay closed?
That's up to the school district, how they handle it. Some school districts, I think, opted to go virtual just because they did not have the space or the planning in place to handle
Yeah, we're doing virtual over at the Hickman Mills Community Center, or Hillcrest Community Center for the elementary kids. Other grades are doing it from home.
Some schools I know are ramping up to move back to, I've talked to some schools recently that are getting some information about starting to move back to in-person classes. So it's up to the school district. I know we provided back to school literature, Children's Mercy's provided back to school literature. A lot of school districts have created back to school literature on how to handle it. CDC has back to school literature, so it's up to the school districts on how they're going to handle each particular case.
Do you have any stats on how many positives there are in Missouri today? To date?
To date, that would be either on the Missouri Department of Health and Senior Services website that I have listed on this. You could go there on their dashboard and they would have it by state and broken down by county. And they might be 1 or 2 days out of date, but it would be within the last couple of days, or it would be on the Kansas City website that was also listed in the presentation, the links.
Now, would those numbers be necessarily from when this started?
Yes.
People started getting it?
Yes.
Present?
Yes.
Okay.
They would have them starting back in February or March. Last I checked, which was probably about 3 or 4 weeks ago when I went on there, they had the numbers going back this year. They usually do them annually, so it would include everything going back to February or March this year.
Yeah, there's over 300,000.
Yeah. Anyone else? Oh, one more?
Does it affect all races and ages of people?
Yes. Yep, just like the flu. And it affects anyone. And I highly recommend flu shots just because it's anything that affects your immune system can make you vulnerable to becoming ill. And so, health department is big about getting flu shots in, so we highly recommend getting flu shots, because that's one more thing you don't need to have your immune system down because you're getting sick with flu. But it's just like the flu. Anything that affects your immune system can make you susceptible to it. So, I think we need to start wrapping it up, or we got time
Yeah,
more?
there's any more questions?
Do we have another question?
So when they started talking about the Wuhan lab, what did the lab have to do with the coronavirus?
That I don't know. I'm not familiar enough with that to be able to speak to it.
Has the health department any latest information on the vaccine?
I know that there has been talk about a vaccine, but there's nothing within our department about anything coming out soon. Speaking from a personal perspective, I think there's talk about a vaccine being started testing, but that's as much as I know about it.
On the national news tonight, they said London was actually looking for healthy people to infect with the virus at the same time and give them, I guess, whatever.
I've heard some news stories from the news, but yeah, we can't speak to any of that, so I don't know. If it doesn't come from the CDC, I don't pay much attention to it at this point. So, any other questions? We have anything online, or?
I haven't seen, nobody said anything online.
All right. Maybe I put them all asleep. Nobody must have contacted COVID yet. Feel free, like I said, you're more than welcome to call, you're more than welcome to email if you have questions, and I'll be happy to answer. So, thanks so much.
Thank you.
Nancy, thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
Guys, I want to thank everybody for coming and your questions. And again, because we are a Catholic organization, we will close with a prayer. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners now and at the hour of our death. Thanks, everybody, and I will say good night to everybody online.
Thanks, everybody online.
You want to go ahead and stop sharing and.
Yeah, stay calm.
Well, how'd it go?
I still got it going right now. Oh, okay.
Take care, Joe. Check it out. Did you get